So when I finally got through rehabilitation, it was kind of like when you go through one of those moments in time, you either, revert to your old ways, or it's kind of a, shifting point that kind of makes you realize, okay, life is short. What do I want to do here? And so,
Hi, I'm Lennis Woods Mullins, and I love to help women to vibe, to be more vibrant, intuitive, beautiful, and empowered in midlife. So come on, let's vibe. One thing I've learned in midlife is the value of the pivot. Not just because I'm in midlife, but the times have been such that I have had to pivot in my business, pivot in my personal life, pivot in my relationships, and I really do feel like I've become the queen of the pivot. But what does it take to get there? So many midlife women are ready to make a change, but they're just not quite sure how to do it. Well, I am so glad to have with me today Kerrie Faye, who has figured it out. She's a Gen X wife and mom who found her passion to write later in life. She's a graduate from Maury State University. She has a bachelor's degree in elementary education. She was raised in Kentucky, where she decided to write her debut novel, Dead Girl. That's where it takes place. And she currently resides in the Rocky Mountain Flatirons in Colorado. Wow, country girl. So great to have you here. Thank you so much for being on the V.I.B.E Living podcast. It's wonderful to have you here today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It is kind of a big deal, a big life change for me to pivot into writing, and I'm excited to be here. So thank you for having me.
Well, first, let me congratulate you on your debut novel, Dead Girl, because that is just awesome. It's going to be coming out February 26th, and we are recording right before it comes out. But I'm going to make sure that before we leave, they'll know how to find you. And of course, also in the show notes is all her information on how you can find her book. But let's talk about how you got here. What motivated you to write a book, and how could you pivot that? Because I know you are a wife and a mom and you're doing other things. What happened to make you decide this is the time to make that pivot?
Yeah, so I think I give credit to God for putting the idea on my heart. But in 2017, I was a passenger in an accident, and I sustained a lot of injuries. So when I finally got through rehabilitation, it was kind of like when you go through one of those moments in time, you either, revert to your old ways, or it's kind of a, shifting point that kind of makes you realize, okay, life is short. What do I want to do here? And so, so in 2018, I decided, why not try writing? So at that point, I'd gotten rehab, I'd graduated from rehab on my left arm, and so I was able to finally have motion with my fingers and type again. And so it was a good way to continue that rehabilitation. But also I was like, I've always loved reading. Like, reading is my favorite thing to do if I'm not hanging out with family. And so I thought, okay, let's try writing a novel. And so there was online a lot of resources, and NaNoWriMo, I don't know if you've heard of that, it's called National Novel Writing Month. They abbreviate it as NaNoWriMo. And you take all the month of November, you write every day. And so I did that, and I wrote my first manuscript, and it was amazing. I loved every minute of it. But then in 2019, we moved. And then 2020 pandemic, so I didn't get back to writing until 2021, wow. And that's the book that I have now, debuting, Dead Girl. So it's pretty
That's interesting, because you started in 2017, but it didn't really come to fruition until 2021. I know people are going to ask you, how did you stay motivated to still keep doing it, especially since it was a first-time effort in the first place?
Right. So I think if I hadn't fallen in love with it like I had, I might have not gone back to it. But because it just spoke to my soul, where have you been all my life? It was like one of those, things that it just triggered something inside of me. And I was like, wow, I love this. So that made it easy to go back to in 2021.
Now, prior to 2017, were you a stay-at-home mom, or were you teaching elementary school? Because I know you have a degree in elementary education.
I was a stay-at-home mom, but from I think most people would agree that is a job. And so I was, the room mom, I was the team mom, so I was going nonstop. And then that accident happened, and it forced me to slow down. Like I didn't have a choice.
Interesting. It's interesting how sometimes God will slow things down or speed things up. So during the slowdown, what kinds of thoughts went through your mind in terms of your ability to go back to what your passion was?
Well, in that time, it's almost like you're just trying to make it hour to hour, sometimes minute to minute, because you're in so much pain, I guess is the real word. But once I got through that difficult part of it, like I said, your mind you either go back to thinking, well, once I get through this recovery, am I going to go back to what I was doing? You let your mind kind of wonder about, well, what if I actually did pursue this? Like, what would that look like? Could I do that? Can I carve out time for this? And so you kind of get past the fear of change and doing something new and, try it.
That's interesting. That fear of change, which is something that I think we all struggle with, but especially in midlife, it can be a challenge because you're thinking, I don't want to fail at this because I don't have time to fail, because I've already lived half of my life, supposedly. I don't know. That whole midlife title kind of puts a lot of pressure on people, I think. And they refer to me as midlife. I don't know how that can be. That would mean I would live to be 134. But anyway, I don't know how that's going to work. But anyway, what kinds of things went through your mind? How did you manage to change any negative thoughts into positive ones to encourage yourself to keep writing?
I think it's important to identify what is the source of the fear. Like, can you put a label? Are you just afraid of failure? I mean, that's okay. Are you a fear what people will think of you? Trying to identify what it is that you're afraid of, and then playing in your mind, what's the worst that could happen? What if you did fail? What? In my case, you're not published? Okay. You weren't published before, big deal. Like you gotta work through that. Well, what is the fear, and what's the worst that could happen in this scenario? Like maybe you wanted to pick up painting. Okay, you're not in a museum, but you have some cool artwork on your wall. You kind of have to work through that. And once you get past that, okay, then you start looking into, well, what would be the first step?
It's interesting because not only were you making a pivot from being a stay-at-home mom and writing a book, you were actually also pursuing a whole new career in midlife. What was that like?
It was weird, and it's still weird in the fact that, the chunk of my life was spent devoted to the kids and my husband. And now that they're older and I can carve out this time for myself, it's like, oh, well, mom actually has a Zoom at 3:00. She can't go do this for me. So it's like there's some growing pains within the family with me pursuing this. But, they're all very supportive, which has been great. But yeah, it's been an interesting journey, and I'm loving it. I'm loving pursuing it, and it gives me a lot of joy.
How has this experience in making the pivot in midlife added to your self-esteem?
I feel pretty darn proud of myself. Because, to be honest, I didn't go to school for this. So it's not like I've got a degree, an MFA in creative writing or anything like that, But it feels good to set a goal for myself and achieve it, and then set another goal for myself and achieve it. It's just kind of build on those different wins to finally know that here in 10 days, my book is going to be published. It's pretty amazing. Yeah. So I feel good.
I love that. Building on the wins. I think sometimes we don't celebrate ourselves enough whenever we do hit a milestone, because we might be thinking, oh, it's just a little milestone. I wrote a paragraph today, but that's one more paragraph that you wrote that you didn't write the day before. So how did you go about celebrating those wins?
Well, I have a team, not a team, sounds like I'm a captain or something. I have a group of friends, and I can commiserate with, when the days aren't the winning days, and they help lift me up. And whenever I I wrote 1,000 words today, they're like, yeah, and just that whole family, that whole, I guess team, I guess we're a team, like that whole support system is a celebration in itself to know that, we're all in this together, and, we'll cheer each other on. And then, when I finally do finish a rough draft of a manuscript, I will treat myself. I will go have a nice dinner, I've accomplished something,
That's wonderful. That's funny because I really do believe that a support system is so important. Mm-hmm. And when sometimes in midlife, when you're making changes like this, one of the things you realize is that your current tribe that you've been hanging out with may not quite understand. I know for me, when I started my business back in 2008, 2009, and, I told them what I wanted to do exclusively online, and they were like, oh, okay. That sounds interesting. And then about 5 years after in business, I started publishing an online magazine. Mm-hmm. And of course, my friends want to support me. And so they were asking me, well, where can I go buy the magazine? I was like, no, it's online. You can't buy it at the store. It's online. Oh, okay. Well, it just didn't register because it was kind of outside their experience. There weren't a lot of people back then who were doing things like that online. And then the demographic that I was appealing to, which was midlife women, they weren't online at all like that. But it's amazing how, I just hung in there. I hung in there because I do believe that pursuing your passion, that's where your treasure is. Yes. And even though, but I love the fact that you had a tribe to support you. And that's one thing we know for sure you want to have. What are some of the other things that women in midlife should be thinking about when they're wanting to make a pivot? What other kinds of things should they be thinking about so they can be successful?
Well, definitely don't discount, your mom friend, that you see in the carpool. You don't know what they're doing, don't be afraid to talk about it with people that you don't believe would be your, audience, because you might be surprised. I've run across people who I went to college with, and they were like, oh yeah, I always wanted to be a writer. And I'm like, okay, well, do it. What's stopping you? I can easily say that now that I'm on the other side of that whole fear, spectrum. But yeah, don't be afraid to reach out to people. You'll be surprised how many, may have experience in that field or know someone who is experienced and can point you in all of a sudden you're on their podcast or something like that. It's amazing how interconnected we all are, and so don't be afraid to talk about it. And I think a lot of things are online now, so you can do a lot of research just with a click, of a keyboard. So don't be afraid to, do research through there. And I think in regards to writing, you want to start, reading a lot if you aren't already doing that, and start, writing and find your community of writers. There's a lot of local organizations that doesn't cost very much. Some are even free that you can meet up and, form a critique group and work on your craft.
I love that. I love the idea of, using your resources and doing research and finding out more and more, because if this is something you're passionate about, the more you find out about it, the more you want to do it, the more. And I would say one of the things too, I would tell midlife women is, don't go for perfection. Okay, because sometimes we can just tweak it, and it's 5 years later and we're still tweaking and nothing's been released. Right. At some point in time, you have to close your eyes and say, okay, I'm sending it out to the author. Okay, I'm launching this new program, or okay, I'm signing up for this class. Instead of putting it off, because procrastination for me is not my friend. I have, but just recently, within the last 5 months or so, I've been suffering from procrastination. And I was talking to my therapist. And by the way, I believe that every midlife person should have a therapist. It's just like going to the dentist or your gynecologist, or for some cases, your plastic surgeon, whatever. You need to have a therapist.
Agreed.
But I was just like, well, what do you think the depression is from? And I said, I don't know. We started peeling back the layers. And the depression was coming from my procrastination, because I'm in the middle of pivoting and launching a brand new platform. And I mean, tweaky, till finally she was saying, well, Linus, the last little bit of tweaking, why don't you just go ahead and hire someone to do the fine tuning so you can get it out there? Because the longer you wait to get it out there, the more depressed you're going to start being, and the more you're going to start beating up on yourself. And she was right. And once I did that, I was no longer suffering from the tweaking thing all the time, and then beating up myself because I still hadn't released it. Now somebody else, it's their responsibility to get it done. And sometimes we have to ask for help.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that procrastination, and also kind of that little nagging fear of not being perfect, again, it's like pinpointing what that is. And we're like, okay, what's going to get me over that hurdle? Maybe in that case, it's like hiring someone to help me do the fine touches so I can feel confident in it being out there,
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, when it comes to being a writer, it's kind of very similar. You got to be like, okay, I have done as much as I could do on this manuscript. Now it's time to let a beta reader go through it and tell me what they see. Because at the end of the day, you kind of get like bogged down in the story and into like where you can't see the forest for the trees kind of thing. You're just so into the details. It's good to do what you can and then let someone else help you and perfect it. So yeah.
I love that. So now the name of the book is called Dead Girl.
Yes.
And it's a young adult fantasy. So tell us, first of all, Dead Girl, who is she? And where did that come from? And, just tell us a little bit about the book. I think it's fascinating. That title is interesting.
Yeah, so it's a young adult fantasy book, as you already mentioned, and people have described it as like Stephen King's Kerrie, which I have not read, but because to me it's more horror, but I, like I said, I haven't read it. But like Stephen King's Kerrie and like this CW show Supernatural, I don't know if you've heard of that, where there's paranormal elements. So that's why the comparison, and that it's a young girl. She's a teen protagonist, and she's been an outcast, almost her whole entire life because she was different, and something bad happens, which triggers this paranormal supernatural event. That carries her throughout the story. So the underdog kind of has her moment,
Yeah. So now, are you dead, girl?
That's so funny. My mom was like, who is this about? She was like,
oh my God, what have I failed?
And I'm like, well, I think every story has some elements to it that are indicative of maybe the author's inner feelings or experiences. So in my case, I would say that I never felt like I fit in. And so that's kind of where I'm pulling from for her.
Wow, that's amazing. As I'm talking to you, I have always felt like I have a book in me. And I started, a fictional book. I've written 2 other books, but I've started kind of beginning to write them a little bit. And you're actually talking to you is motivating me to give it a try. It's because it is kind of cathartic, isn't it?
Oh yeah. Things come out in the writing that you didn't realize you were working through. So, once I got on the other side of this manuscript, I realized, wow, this has a lot to do with a good friend of mine who passed away. And I was just like, kind of like gave me like the chills once I actually I was like, wow, I was working through some things on this.
Were you typing it or were you writing it?
Typing, yeah.
Okay. I always wondered about that too with authors. Do they you know, in the older movies, they're pounding away at the typewriter.
Yeah.
They never show them writing, you know. So I thought, okay, yeah, that's amazing, because I believe that bits of ourselves are in everything that we do, all the time. And what I love about what you've done is that you've taken bits of your life experience and your desire. Was it always a desire in your previous lives, so to speak, that you wanted to be a writer?
No, and when I look back at it, you know, I'm like, well, why didn't anyone tell me I was good at it? Maybe I would have done this earlier, right? But then I look back and I go, well, you did win some awards for your writing. You did. You did have something published when you were young.
Oh my goodness. So this is what I'm talking about. We as women, and we carry this right into our midlife, and that's why I wanted to talk with you to encourage others. We have done so much that we really forget about it because we never celebrate it. It's hard to forget celebrations, okay? So we need to learn to celebrate those things and take a look at the sum total of your work. And you might be surprised what you find back there that you think, wow, this is something I would like to pursue now that the kids are a little older, or in my case, my kids are, you know, totally launched. They have kids of their own. They pay taxes and mortgages. They're launched. So now I am living that part of my life, doing, you know, the things that I am passionate about. But when I went to school, I didn't get a degree in nutrition, or wellness wasn't even a word back in the Stone Age. It wasn't even a word, okay? Online business, what the heck was that? We were barely had 2 stone tablets back then. So, you know, that was all new. But when I look back at it, I was a nutrition minor in college. I'd always been fascinated with the idea of eating correctly and supplements and herbs and all that kind of stuff. It was introduced to me by my mom many years ago. She said, it's so funny. We would go to the nutrition store and she would buy this, you know, alternative foods. She would always get wheat germ so she could fry her pork chops in the wheat germ. So, you know,
I love that. I didn't know that.
And, you know, fast forward so many years later, I thought, oxymoron. Wheat germ, healthy in some cases. Pork chops, fried in oil, maybe not. Putting the two together. And it raised my awareness. It raised my awareness of other ways to do things and to eating healthy and all of that. But that was like, you know, 60 years ago. And it wasn't until I was in my 50s that I began to pursue it. So I want to encourage those of you who are listening. There could be something way back in your background that you had a modicum of success, or maybe a lot of success, but it was just so long ago, you don't even think about it. And then all of a sudden, I mean, after you started in 2017, I have to ask you that. What was the impetus to get you to start writing in the first place? What was it? What was that one day where you said, I'm going to just start writing?
Well, I had the accident in 2017.
Right.
It was after the accident that it was like, God just put it on my heart to try, you know. I was still working through my rehabilitation and
see, intuition. Sometimes our intuition will lead us to things. And that's why I'm so passionate about the whole V.I.B.E philosophy. You know, if you are working in your gifting and pursuing all the things that bring you joy, that vibrancy is going to come forward, because Kerrie, you're so cute. You got this vibrant look. Yeah, I can tell you're happy in what you're doing. You're using your intuition. That inner beauty is radiating out. And how empowered do you feel now?
I feel great. Like sometimes I'll have a moment where I'm like, what is happening? You know, do they know that I'm just a mom? You know, like, but yeah, it feels great. It feels pretty darn amazing. And it's kind of like what you said. I guess it was there the whole time, but I just had never tapped into it. And it feels pretty darn good to be on this other side of it and know that, hey, I've actually found what I was meant to do. So it's nice.
That's fantastic. And I'm so glad you came on to share your story. I truly do believe that we met for a reason. We met on Clubhouse, I think it was, right? And whenever, you know, we have some problems connecting, technical difficulties, cancellations, family, whatever. But whenever that happens with the podcast, I always know that it's going to be a really powerful one and that someone is going to hear this and it's going to change their life. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. You are wonderful, and it's wonderful having you here today. And for all of you who are listening, just take a look at the show page. You'll see all of Kerrie's links, including the link to her book, that it's going to be fabulous. It will be released February 26th on 2024. And by the time this comes out, there's the book. For those of you who are looking at the video on Spotify, they can see the video portion. There's the book, Dead Girl. And there's the very much alive author who wrote it. We're so glad. I'm so excited for you. And stay in touch and let us know how it goes.
Absolutely. I certainly will. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. And thank you to all of you to listening to the V.I.B.E Living Podcast. If you liked this podcast or any of the other shows that we've had, please like the podcast, make some comments. I want to hear from you. And also share the podcast. And most importantly, subscribe. Help me get to the upper 5% of the Apple Podcast. We're at 10% right now. Let's move it up to 5%. And thank you so much for listening. Have a fabulous day. And don't forget to vibe. Bye-bye, everybody. Thanks for listening to the V.I.B.E Living Podcast. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment, and share this podcast. Have a fantastic day, and don't forget to vibe. Bye-bye, everybody.